way to conceptualize how distortion, right, the belief is greater than reality. The results contradict, but belief is not in alignment with results. Right? Messaging is distorted from what's actually going on. This is where you hear, for example, when an organization has succumbed to the liar lid. So the one of the symptoms would be where values are talked about in words and they're even thought about. There's a feedback loop of talking to convince the self that the management is talking about the values of what we believe in, why we believe in, uh, that we believe in it, that you know you, others need to pres- pre- prescribe to what we believe in, how what we value, that we value it. So the talking, the thoughts and the words are the fixation around the uh, the values, but the actions don't line up. So that the lit values are not lived, but they're talked about. Where on the inverse of that, when values are lived and they're not talked about, they're lived and not talked about, that has its own set of problems, its own set of adversities that come. But when they're talked about and not lived, that contradiction, that hypocrisy, that demoralizes the organization. When the values are talked about and not lived, organization is suffering from the liar lid. It has a lid on it's like the leadership lid. There's a blind spot. There's a mis misapprehension. There's a missing. The organization is dysfunctional. It's not functioning. Attention has been lost on what matters most. It's lost sight of its purpose and why it exists. Its attention is off the customer and on itself. And on when it on itself, it's on just about everything other than the customer. It's self-centered. It lacks the esteem of self, which comes as a consequence of serving others. And the other it serves at the highest first is the customer, because the customer is why it exists. When its attention is on the customer, its intentions, its actions are congruent with its words. So it could be talking, the organization could be talking about what it values and value, that what's important to it, how it expects people to behave and relate to one another. And it may actually be talking more about more about those things, the less it's acting them out. It hasn't, there's a disconnection between the acting out and the talking. And that connection between the acting out and the talking is where things are bumping, and the accountability happens peer to peer, side to side, not top down or bottom up. Bottom up accountability means that the irony is the most competent, capable people speak out. They're often seen as the pariahs. Their their responsibility is overcompensating for the lack of responsibility from the actual organization. The systems have broken down to such a degree that people at the bottom are speaking up to the truth, and they're oftentimes seen as the pariahs. So the top, they're either they're seen as the bad, and they're subjugated to the persecution of by the organization, or and that's bottom up. They'll be snuffed out. Triangles form, and they're through side conversations that those that are speaking up, that are at the bottom. So bottom up, there's two. They're holding the organization accountable. They're in the worst position. They're in the least. They have the least leverage, the least strength from a influence, from a power standpoint, an authority standpoint. They may have influence, and that influence is dangerous to the organization. So they will be snuffed out. They become the pariahs. That's when bottom up. Top down accountability, the hammer's coming down hard. And I think the top down and the bottom up are inextricably linked, because that hammer that comes down hard ends up coming down on the honest, stalwart, most competent. They outgrow their organizations bottom up. Those people, the ones that stay get beat down, beat down, beat down. They lose their sense of self. The ones that stay, eventually they get beaten, 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 beaten down, and they become disengaged. And this is one of the, I would say, one of the most profound value adds of like the search business. Like great search firms that are curating relationships with talent within the ecosystem of business are creating, are listening, and like they're creating connections for people to move their careers um, horizontally and vertically out of organizations that they've outgrown. It's can be very difficult for people, especially even the most conscientious people, to let go of cultures that they've outgrown. And they're all, interestingly enough, because of the type of core values that those people have, and that attention to that willingness to take ownership on an individual, like an identity level, at a personal level, be so difficult for them to let go, and they become the pariahs. They become dangerous to the corrupt organization. It's top-down accountability. Top-down accountability is, I don't believe, a way to look at accountability. Accountability is a symptom of per top-down personal responsibility, which is modeling or living out the values, like each person picking up and carrying their weight, top-down modeling that creates inspiration that actually signals to the people what the organization believes and what is true. And then the people hold each other accountable. Accountability is a symptom of personal responsibility, top down, modeled, and that influences horizontal accountability. Accountability is not vertical. It's unless the leader, like the leader in authority above a subordinate, is creating, is instigating that feedback, that feedback loop. Now, when the liar lid is in effect, that feedback loop breaks down, and what was once open is closed, and so now there's a disconnect in the flow of information. So people don't know how to form around. They're not in formation. They're not in formation. They're not aligned. The what and how is confused. So the who is unsure, and that impacts the why. So the what is unclear. So the who is unsure of the how. And the why becomes lost, essentially. Oh, this froze here. From a sales standpoint, selling things that shouldn't be sold, over promising, under delivering, discounting to compensate for the lack of belief, chasing revenue instead of value. When from a sales standpoint, re-anchoring on the customer truth. I was touching upon that earlier, that because that the customer journey is the value journey that aligns with the purpose of an organization. So it's like, who are our customers? Why them? What do we do that is of value? How do we get it to them? That's a constant conversation. It's always the nuance or the context is changing with new information as an organization ebbs and flows through its own life cycle and economic cycles. So to break the liar lid in sales, re-anchor to the customer truth, tighten qualification. So what is that? Tighten qualification it infers asking better questions. Asking better questions is a part of the process of gathering information, gathering data. To gather data and information, there needs to be attention needs to be focused. Aligning promises with actual delivery. If feedback is sought out, the way to respect the feedback that is given is to do something about it, is to get something done. It's not just to ask for feedback, but ask in the spirit of actually doing something about the information that is given. Aligning promises with actual delivery, having actions back up the feedback inquiry demonstrates the respect of asking in the first place, makes it real. When organizations are stuck in that distortion, that liar lid distortion, they make desperate, reactive decisions based on their own self-interest, short-term self-interest, not taking into account other parties, other all of the various stakeholders, shareholders, constituents. Then long term, the cost of that will be much greater. It's like kicking the can down the road, as they say. So question to explore would be, are we selling what's true or what we need to be true based on our own belief, our own rationalization, our own excuses, on what's true or what we need to be true. Someone that is in a position of ultimate authority, influence, their genuine care to know what is true and what is in the best interest of the people that they serve. So this is the power of the chief executive officer's seat, is that their attention and their intentions and who they serve and that they're in the pursuit of serving them at the highest influences every constituent of the organization. Are we selling what's true, or are we, or what we need to be true? You know, when there's a liar lid is in effect, marketing, a distortion looks like messaging is disconnected from reality. So the messaging is one thing, the reality is the opposite. Brand is the belief consumers have in X to solve for Y. So X, the company, Y for the consumer's problem. That's the belief. But belief doesn't mean it's only a correlation to reality. Like it's a probability. We believe that we'll get this. But what actually happens is where culture matters. The culture matters. It materializes in action. It's the operating system. What actually happens in the organization? Culture matters. Culture is the belief, is the behaviors, habits, rituals. Well, what influences behaviors? Beliefs. Beliefs influence behaviors. Our beliefs reflect what we value. What we value reflects our beliefs. So is if there's an incongruence between what we do and what we say, then it's our our value, what we value in actuality contradicts what we value in idea, in statement. And the example of distortion in marketing is that the brand and the actual experience are misaligned. They, it's over polished. It's um the attention is on how we are perceived versus what we are doing. There's a how if the attention is on what we are doing, right? The attention is on what we are doing. That's if we're doing one thing, we're not, yeah, yeah, yeah. The attention is on what we are doing. That's what's actually happening. If what's actually happening versus what's being presented are incongruent, there's a distortion in the marketing. Attention, eyeballs, perception does not connect to reality just because perception we could believe something to be what it is and it not actually be that. There's it takes there's filters, there's a process to refine and clarify, is this what I think it is? That's where relationships come in. Relationships, they're relating. There's relating. There's a feedback loop. There's a push and a pull, a push and a pull, a prod and a poke. And over time, relationships that they form and they are tested by the environment, which changes and it pushes and pulls. And ultimately, over time, people's values, their their core values, what they value is reflected in the course of time. Does the organization really value its customers? What, more than itself? Does the organization value itself more than its customers? What do the results actually show? You know, what do those relationships look like? breaking the lid in marketing, that's you match the message to the actual product. It is real. It is what it is. What you see is what you get. Communication is simplified. It takes a hell of a lot of work to get to simple. Is one thing that I've learned as a student of business, leadership, culture, management. It's taken a hell of a lot of work to get simple, and I've got a long way to go. A lot of writing, a lot of workbooks, thousands and thousands of hours in the field. It takes a lot to get to simple. Speaking from reality versus aspiration. So I think, when the values are aspirational, when there aren't, um, in the absence of decisions, like in the absence of consequences around the values when they're not lived up to, and also the recognition of when they are. So when people are recognized for despite the contradiction of values, maybe they made sales, but their values contradicted the values of the organization. They'll be recognized based on an outcome, but they're not being confronted and penalized for their values. Then that's sending a feedback loop that the values don't have any meaning. So they're not going to the opposite of what the organization says its valuing is being recognized. And though it's less likely to hold people to account in compromising them. And so they're meaningless. They have no meaning. It isn't clear what the identity of the organization is, and clear what the culture is. A helpful question for to ask oneself around marketing and this and how distorted it is. Is our story real, or are we hiding behind it? Is our story real, or are we hiding behind it? Is our story real, or are we hiding behind it? The story will naturally manifest itself. The story will naturally manifest itself. The stories naturally come about. They naturally grow and expand from the lived experience of people working with customers and building relationships with their peers. The stories naturally manifest and take place because there are experiences that naturally come about from the pursuit of solving everyday problems with everyday people. Distortion looks like in operations, reworking, inefficiency, confusion, lack of ownership, slow execution, firefighting instead of systems, just tons of reactivity. Now it's all the conversations are on the who, the who, and not the what and the how. The why is totally lost because that's connected to the customers. And now it's all about the who. It's all blame, 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 and not the what now, the what now, the what now. And breaking that in operations looks like clarifying roles and ownership, simplifying processes, focusing on fewer things well. Um, the restoration of accountability comes from all of the above. Right? Restoring accountability is where hiring that CEO role. That's why if founder has to mature into the role of CEO and or ha, one be hired to that has that education, competence, willingness. Willingness is huge in that top spot because the willingness to continue to sacrifice their life when they're beyond they're beyond money. They're beyond survival. They're in a deeper, they're not working for those needs, they're working for a higher calling, a deeper part of their own identity as stewards of the culture. An important question to ask on the from an operation standpoint is, do we know who owns what, or are we pretending? Do we know who owns what, or are we pretending? Who's in charge? Who's in charge? And a weak person in leadership will play people against each other. We'll just it will become less and less clear who is in charge and who owns what. Distortion in finance, is ignoring the negative signals in the financial perspective, justifying bad spending, confusing revenue and health, because revenue, you can grow yourself right out of business. Delayed reality recognition. So like the meetings are not, there's no depth. The people that are paying attention and paid to pay attention to the numbers are not in a position to share and speak and clarify what the aim is right now. And so they can't become clear on what the aim should be. It's too intuitive and it's not, there's not enough clarity. There may not even be access to the numbers. There may not even be data to work from, right? But breaking the liar-lidded finance means facing the real numbers, cutting unnecessary spending, reallocating towards value creation, rebuilding disciplines, a lot of painful communication, tough conversations, honest conversations, clear conversations. if, courage comes in. That's where courage comes in. So a question to ask is, are we reading the numbers or are we rewriting them? Are we reading them or rewriting them? Are we rationalizing? Which Munger would always say, the accounting is the language of business. Right? But departments and how they function are reflections of leadership. So when they're unclear, leadership is unclear. When leadership is unclear, they have to ask themselves, are they working? And what does that mean to them? What do they want? Because I'm a big believer that if the ultimate leader does not want to work, they won't. And the less that they suffer, the more everyone else does. That's why presidents in the West, I think, age so much in such a short period of time. Because when they don't suffer, everyone does. When there's misalignment across functions and departments, there's internal misalignment at the top. And without alignment at the top, there won't be collaboration, correspondence, cooperation from department to department. And trust, it's not a moral piece, it's a predictability piece. You trust based on consistency and predictability. It's like, if you don't know what's up and down the next, tomorrow and the next day, how do you make any decisions? Rational, logical. People can't operate from rationale or logic. They end up operating out of emotion and stress and fear and anxiety. And it breaks down the organization. It breaks down the culture is the identity of the organization. And it fragments. It's under pressure based on the environment, the ups and downs of the environment. There's always change, movement, pressure. But it fragments in the misalignment of the leadership. And that's I think part of the reason this CEOs are compensated so well. Uh, the they can be compensated so well is when their incentives and the incentives, how they're incentivized on results and performance, they can be compensated so well because that role has such a exponential magnified impact in every other role and how much its labor turns into a return on that labor and a return on that intellectual property based on how that role shows up, as an example. But realignment is not motivational, it's structural. And culture is can be relegated just words, but that's not culture. That's brand, or that's PR, or that's ideology. But culture is how each function behaves under pressure. Like the test of what an organization values and the test of what a person's character is revealed in how it functions under pressure. And the leader must decide clearly, see honestly, and enforce consistently. See clearly, enforce consistently, and decide honestly. And that becomes more and more difficult to parse out as an organization grows